The night I realized my wife was a stranger, I was standing in my own kitchen at 2:17 in the morning, holding a coffee mug I'd never seen before. It was pale blue, with a small chip on the handle and a faint ring of dried espresso inside the rim. I turned it over in my hands twice, maybe 3 times, the ceramic cool against my palms, my breath slow and deliberate in the silence of the house. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, the kind that hums, that presses against your eardrums like something held just below the surface of water. Our kitchen had 42 mugs. I knew this because my daughter Lily had counted them once on a rainy Saturday afternoon when she was 7, announcing the number like a scientific breakthrough while I cooked pancakes behind her. 42 mugs. Every single one of them I could account for. The chipped green one from our honeymoon in Lisbon. The tall black ones we bought from IKEA the year we moved into this house. The novelty one with the cat that Vanessa's mother gave us the Christmas before she passed. This one, this pale blue one, did not belong here. I set it back on the counter, exactly where I'd found it, and stood there for a long moment with my hands still hovering over it, as if moving away too quickly might cause something to collapse. My name is Daniel Holt. I'm 43 years old. I'm a structural engineer, which means I've spent 20 years professionally understanding the points at which things break. Load tolerance, stress fractures, the invisible threshold between stability and collapse. I'd never thought to apply that framework to a marriage. 14 years with Vanessa. 14 years of school pickups and mortgage payments and shared colds and inside jokes, and a daughter named Lily who smells like strawberry shampoo and asks questions that make me feel smarter just by trying to answer them. 14 years is not a number. 14 years is a texture. It's the specific way someone loads the dishwasher, the side of the bed they drift to, the sound their breathing makes at 3 a.m. when the room is dark and the world outside is still. I put the mug in the cabinet with the others and went to bed. Vanessa was already asleep on her side, one arm curled beneath the pillow in the way she'd always slept since before I knew her, her face slack and unguarded. The room smelled like her lavender face cream and the faint trace of something else, something I couldn't place immediately, something that sat at the back of my throat like a word I couldn't quite pronounce. I lay next to her for a long time, staring at the ceiling, cataloging the shadows. I told myself the mug was nothing. I almost believed it. Let me go back 2 weeks to where this actually started, not with the mug, but with a Friday evening in late October, when the leaves in our neighborhood were doing their annual slow burn and the air tasted like wood smoke and endings. Vanessa and I had been married since the spring I turned 29. We met at a conference. I was presenting a structural analysis paper to a room full of engineers, and she was there on behalf of an architectural firm, bored out of her mind by the technical sections and furiously sketching in a notepad in the second row. After my talk, I'd walked over to see what she was drawing. It was a caricature of the moderator with improbably large ears. We'd had coffee, then dinner, then 4 months of long-distance calls before she moved across the country. I used to tell people that I fell in love with the way she paid attention, not to me, specifically, but to everything. The way she'd stop on a sidewalk to look at a shadow, the way she remembered the names of waiters, the way she'd get a small crease between her eyebrows when she was genuinely listening. Now she was sitting at the kitchen table on that Friday evening, looking at her phone with a particular quality of attention I didn't fully recognize. "Claire wants to do a girls' night," she said, not looking up. Claire was her best friend from university. They'd known each other for nearly 20 years. "When?" I asked. "Next Friday. I know it's not ideal timing with your project deadline." "It's fine," I said, and I meant it. I did. "You should go." She looked up then and smiled. A quick, warm smile, the real one that reached her eyes. "You sure?" "Tell Claire I said hi." She went back to her phone. Later, I would replay that moment hundreds of times, trying to identify the thing I missed. There was something in the particular angle of her shoulders, something in the speed at which she'd looked back down. But I was making dinner, and Lily was calling me from upstairs about a math problem, and the evening moved on the way evenings do, in a current, carrying you forward whether you're paying attention or not. That was the first lie. I didn't know it yet. The following week passed in the ordinary rhythm of our lives. The alarm at 6:15, the school run, the commute, the specific accumulated weight of midweek Tuesdays. Lily had a drama rehearsal on Wednesday that ran long. So I picked her up at 6:30 and listened to her describe every single scene in the play with the earnest intensity of someone who has only recently discovered that performance exists. She was 11 years old and had recently decided she wanted to be an actress, a marine biologist, and possibly a judge, in some flexible combination. I loved her with a ferocity that occasionally scared me. On Thursday evening, the night before the girls' night, I noticed Vanessa doing something unusual. She was in the bathroom, the door slightly open, the light on, and she was trying on earrings. Not the earrings she wore to our friends' dinner parties or to work functions. These were different. Smaller, more deliberate, two thin gold drops that caught the light in a specific, intentional way. She was holding her hair up, tilting her head, studying her own reflection with a focused expression I recognized from moments that used to be directed at me. I was passing in the hallway. I didn't stop. I kept walking to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited for the weight in my chest to clarify itself into something I could name. It didn't. I told myself that women dress up for their friends. I told myself that this was normal, that I was looking for trouble where there wasn't any, that 14 years of marriage hadn't taught me to read her this well for nothing. That night, before we slept, she turned to me and said, "I love you, you know." "I know," I said. "I love you too." She squeezed my hand once under the covers and let go. I lay awake for 2 hours after she fell asleep, trying to understand why that felt like a farewell. The opening section establishes Daniel's psychological state through the lens of professional expertise. A structural engineer, trained to identify the invisible thresholds where things collapse, who has catastrophically failed to apply that skill to his own marriage. This is a textbook example of compartmentalization. We build separate mental categories for our professional and personal lives, and the analytical tools we use with precision in one domain simply don't get imported into the other, because to do so would be emotionally destabilizing. Daniel's fixation on the unfamiliar coffee mug is diagnostically significant. Rather than confronting the question it raises, he places it back exactly where he found it, a near-perfect behavioral expression of denial. The deliberateness of that gesture is telling. He doesn't discard the mug, doesn't interrogate it, doesn't mention it to Vanessa. He restores surface order while chaos takes root underneath. The detail about Lily counting the mugs functions as a poignant psychological anchor. It ties Daniel's sense of domestic security to precise, knowable inventories. 42 mugs. The introduction of a 43rd is not merely a mystery. It is a violation of the ordered world he has built and believes in. The final image, Vanessa squeezing his hand and saying, "I love you," the night before her lie, reveals a dynamic psychologists call affective inconsistency. The emotional warmth is real, which is precisely what makes the deception so disorienting. Betrayal is rarely committed by people who feel nothing. The hand squeeze is genuine. So is the lie. And Daniel, lying awake beside her, is beginning, without yet having the language for it, to sense the fracture forming beneath the weight. The morning of the girls' night was unremarkable in the way that certain mornings can be, the ones you only recognize in retrospect as hinges, as the invisible pivot between before and after. I made coffee. Lily ate cereal and told me about a dream she'd had involving a talking dolphin and a misunderstanding about homework. I laughed in the right places and checked my email and drove her to school in the pale autumn light. Vanessa had already left for work by the time I returned. She was a senior designer at an interior architecture firm downtown and kept earlier hours than me when she had client presentations. The house was quiet. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, the coffee going warm in my hand, looking at nothing in particular, and then I went to work. That evening, I came home to find her getting ready. This was at 5:45. The girls' night, according to the plan she'd sketched out for me earlier in the week, was a dinner reservation at 7:30 at a restaurant in the city center, followed by whatever. Claire's territory. I'd stopped asking about the itinerary because I'd already told myself the story I wanted. A normal evening between old friends, wine and laughter, and the kind of conversation that married people sometimes miss. She was in the bedroom when I came in, standing in front of the full-length mirror in a dress I hadn't seen before. Dark green, fitted, the kind of thing that required consideration. She had her back to me when I entered. She was reaching behind herself, trying to do up a zip, and she startled slightly when she heard my footsteps. "You're early," she said. Traffic was light. I crossed the room and zipped the dress without being asked. She held her hair up while I did it, and I was close enough to smell her perfume. This was also new, not her usual scent, the one I associated with her skin so completely that I sometimes smelled it when she wasn't in the room. This was something else. Something darker, with more weight to it. New perfume. I asked. Claire gave it to me, she said easily. Birthday gift. I keep forgetting to wear it. Her birthday had been in July. 3 months ago. Her birthday had been in July. 3 months ago. I nodded and stepped back. She lowered her hair and turned to look at herself in the mirror, adjusting something at her collarbone. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched her in the way you watch someone when you're trying to see them and the angle keeps shifting. When will you be back? I asked. Late, probably. Don't wait up. She glanced at me in the mirror. Lily already ate. We're doing pasta. Perfect. She smiled and turned from the mirror, picking up her bag from the chair. Small bag. Evening bag. Not the big practical one she took to work. She bent and kissed me on the cheek, and I felt the unfamiliar perfume settle briefly around my face before she pulled back. Have a good night, I said. You too. The front door closed at 6:52. Lily and I made pasta. She was going through a phase of intense interest in cooking and had recently decided that she was in charge of the seasoning, a responsibility she took with a seriousness that I found both charming and mildly alarming. We ate at the kitchen table and she told me more about the play. She was playing a secondary character, a village elder, and had apparently decided to base the performance on her school librarian, a woman named Mrs. Okonkwo, whom Lily admired for her authoritative quietness. Dad, she said, twirling pasta around her fork with excessive concentration. Is Mom going to be at my rehearsal tomorrow? Your mother's going to try, I said. She has an early meeting. Lily nodded, processing this in the careful way she processed most things. Then, she said that last time. I looked at my daughter. She was not looking at me. She was still focused on the pasta, and her tone was entirely neutral, the kind of neutral that children use when they've decided something isn't worth pressing because adults don't always give useful answers. I know, I said. I'll remind her. After Lily was in bed, I sat in the living room with a book I didn't read. The television was off. The house made its usual small sounds, the settling of the structure, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant pulse of a car passing on the street outside. I checked my phone once, found no message from Vanessa, and put it down. At 10:30, I texted her, hope it's going well. Don't forget Lily's rehearsal tomorrow. She replied 20 minutes later, having so much fun. Tell Lily I'll be there XO. Then, almost immediately, a second message. Don't wait up, we're moving to Claire's place after. I read that twice. She hadn't mentioned going to Claire's. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment, and then I typed, sounds good. Be safe. I went to bed. I did not sleep. At 1:48 in the morning, I heard the front door. I lay still in the dark and listened to the sounds of her moving through the house. The light in the hallway, the water running briefly in the bathroom, the soft sounds of someone being careful not to wake people. She came into the bedroom quietly and slid into bed beside me with the practiced movements of long habit, and I stayed very still with my eyes closed, breathing evenly, and she lay there for perhaps 3 minutes before her breathing shifted and deepened into sleep. She smelled different. The perfume had faded into something else, something that wasn't quite her, and wasn't quite the perfume, and wasn't quite anything I could identify precisely, but that sat in the air between us in the dark like a third presence in the room. I lay awake until nearly 4 a.m. In the morning, she woke Lily and made her breakfast and came to the rehearsal. She was 20 minutes late, slipping in to sit next to me in the third row with a coffee cup and an apologetic smile. Lily found us in the audience afterward, flushed with performance adrenaline, and Vanessa hugged her and said she'd been incredible, and Lily beamed, and I watched my wife's face in the pale fluorescent light of the school hall and tried to understand what I was seeing. She looked the same. That was the thing. She looked exactly the same. That evening, while she was upstairs with Lily doing bedtime, I found the pale blue mug. It was at the back of the cabinet, not hidden exactly, but not prominent either. Slid in among the others with a casualness that could have been carelessness or could have been something more deliberate. I lifted it out, turned it over. No brand markings on the base. The ceramic had a particular matte quality that suggested artisanal, handmade. The small chip on the handle was old. That edge was smooth, worn. Someone had used this mug many times before. In my house. I put it back, went to bed, and said nothing. Here is a masterclass in the psychology of motivated perception, the deeply human tendency to interpret ambiguous evidence in the direction that requires the least disruption to one's existing worldview. Daniel notices the new dress, the unfamiliar perfume, the small evening bag, the unannounced addition of going to Claire's apartment afterward. Each detail, in isolation, is explainable. Perfume, a birthday gift, belatedly worn. Dress, women dress up for friends. Late return, a natural extension of a good evening. The human brain is extraordinarily efficient at manufacturing plausible explanations, particularly when the alternative explanation would require dismantling something foundational. What is psychologically crucial here is Daniel's behavior in bed, lying completely still, feigning sleep while his wife settles beside him. This is a significant moment of avoidance. He chooses not to know. He chooses performance over confrontation. And this choice is not cowardice, but self-protection. He intuitively understands that once the question is asked aloud, the answer cannot be unheard. Lily's observation, quiet, precise, devastating, is perhaps the most emotionally loaded detail in this section. Children often function as unwitting detectors of emotional truth. Her comment about the last rehearsal, delivered with careful neutrality, suggests she has already internalized a pattern that Daniel is still resisting. The mug, discovered again at the chapter's close, functions as a recurring symbol of intrusion, something from outside that has settled into the domestic interior. Daniel's second decision to replace it without comment confirms that the denial mechanism is holding, but only barely. The structural engineer is beginning to take readings he cannot yet afford to report. I am a precise person by nature. I don't mean this in a cold way. I have warmth, I think, and humor, and I can sit with uncertainty in most areas of my life without it troubling me unduly. But I notice things. It's an occupational disposition that became a personal one. I pay attention to measurements, to small deviations, to the gap between what something appears to be and what the numbers actually say. In the 2 weeks that followed the girls' night, I started taking readings I hadn't taken before. Not obsessively, or not at first. It was more like a shift in the calibration of my attention. The same information was present, but I was looking at it differently. And what I found, when I looked carefully, was that there were more deviations than I'd noticed. Her phone, for instance. Vanessa had always been relaxed about her phone. We weren't the kind of couple who guarded our devices or felt the need to. We built something that felt fundamentally open, a marriage without opaque corners. She'd leave her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. She'd hand it to Lily when Lily needed to look something up. She'd read me funny messages from Claire while we were eating dinner. I'd never had any reason to pay attention to the phone as an object. Now I noticed that it was almost always face down. Not dramatically, not in an obvious, catching yourself way. Just face down, screen pressed to whatever surface it was resting on. The counter, the arm of the sofa, her bedside table. A small, habitual gesture that might mean nothing. That probably meant nothing. That I found I couldn't stop noticing. I noticed, too, that she was getting up earlier. Not significantly earlier, 15, 20 minutes. But she'd come downstairs before me, and by the time I appeared, she'd already have her phone in hand. Already have that particular focused look, and she'd glance up with a smile that was real enough, but that arrived a fraction of a second too late, as if she'd had to remember to deploy it. And I noticed, I hate that I noticed this, that she had started locking the bathroom door when she showered. The second girls' night was announced on a Thursday. Claire's having people over, Vanessa said, in the same easy tone as before. Saturday evening. I might head over early to help her set up. How many people? I asked. She shrugged. Maybe 8 or 10. The usual crowd. I nodded. I knew Claire's usual crowd. I'd met most of them over the years. I liked some of them. Should I come? I asked. A brief pause. Smaller than a breath. You hate those things, she said. All those people you half know and have to make conversation with for 3 hours. That's true, I said. And it was. She wasn't wrong. But I watched her face as she said it, and something in the certainty of her response, the speed of it, turned quietly in my chest. Besides, she added, Lily has that project due Monday. Someone should be here. That was true also. I said nothing more. On Saturday afternoon, I did something I am not entirely proud of. I texted Claire. We weren't close friends. Ours was a second-order relationship, the kind that exists because of a shared primary person, but we were warm enough. I'd helped her move once, years ago. We texted occasionally, comfortable territory. I kept it casual. Hey Claire, Vanessa mentioned you're hosting tonight. Hope it's going well. I would have come, but Lily's got a deadline. I hit send and waited. Claire replied 40 minutes later. Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, it should be fun. Just a small thing, some of the old uni crowd. You're always welcome, you know. I think V said she might be a bit late actually. She has some work thing first? I read the message 3 times. Then I put the phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a long time. Vanessa had told me she was going early to help Claire set up. Claire did not know this. Claire thought she was coming late, after a work thing. I didn't confront her. I want to be clear about that. I made a deliberate choice in that moment not to act immediately, because I understood, with the professional part of my brain that I was beginning to reluctantly engage, that acting on partial information is how structures fail catastrophically rather than controllably. I needed more data. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I picked up a sledgehammer. Vanessa left at 4:30. She told me Claire's gathering started at 6, so she was going early to help set up. Now I knew that was false. What I didn't know, what I still couldn't see clearly, was whether this was something specific and terrible or something else entirely. A surprise. A work event she'd felt embarrassed about. Something innocent she'd fabricated for reasons I hadn't considered. I was looking for the load-bearing wall. I hadn't found it yet. I sat with Lily while she worked on her project, a model of the solar system, which we constructed from polystyrene balls and paint with a level of scientific accuracy that Lily considered non-negotiable. We worked for 2 hours at the kitchen table, and she talked about her teacher's opinions on orbital mechanics. And I painted Saturn's rings and said very little, and the normalcy of it was simultaneously comforting and surreal. At 7:15, I did something I'd never done before in 14 years of marriage. I checked her phone records through our shared family plan account. I want to explain something about this. I know what it looks like. I know that people will have opinions about this choice, and some of those opinions will be correct. But I also want to be honest about what it felt like, not like a violation and not like an investigation. It felt like pressing my ear to a wall and listening for the structural groan that tells you whether the building is safe. The records were not detailed. I could see numbers, durations, timestamps, not content. But they told me enough. There was a number she'd called or received calls from 47 times in the past 3 weeks. A number I didn't recognize. Sometimes the calls were brief, 2 minutes, 3. Sometimes longer, 20, 25 minutes. They clustered in the mornings and late evenings, and on the 2 days she'd had girls' nights. Tonight, at 4:58, 28 minutes after she'd left my house, she had called that number. The call had lasted 31 minutes. I put the phone down and went to check on Lily, who had fallen asleep on the sofa with Neptune still in her hand, blue and small and perfect. I carried her up to bed, tucked her in, stood in the doorway of her room for a long time in the dark. I thought about 14 years. I thought about the conference where we met, and the caricature of the large-eared moderator, and the 4 months of long-distance calls, and the day Lily was born, and all the ordinary Tuesdays in between. I thought about a pale blue mug with a chipped handle. And I thought, I have to know, whatever it costs. I have to know what's actually here, and then I have to decide what to do with the knowledge. But I cannot live in the gap between what I suspect and what I know. That gap is where people go quietly insane. Vanessa came home at 11:40. She found me in the kitchen, reading a book. She looked slightly flushed and happy, in the way people look when they've been laughing. She said the party was great. She said Claire sent her love. She poured herself a glass of water and told me about a funny argument that had broken out over a board game. I said the right things. I asked the right questions. And I watched her face in the kitchen light and thought, who is the man on the other end of that phone? At this stage tracks the psychological migration from unconscious unease to active investigation, a transition that is rarely clean or decisive in real life. Daniel's process is characteristic of what researchers call epistemic grief, the painful experience of seeking information that you simultaneously need and dread. His decision to check the phone records is presented with notable self-awareness. He understands the ethical complexity of the act, and yet he frames it not as surveillance, but as structural diagnosis. This framing is psychologically revealing. By using professional language, he achieves emotional distance from what is, in fact, a deeply personal rupture. The detail about Lily sleeping with Neptune in her hand is not decorative. It functions as an emotional fulcrum. The child, innocent and small, asleep between the two worlds of her parents, holding a small blue planet. This image gives Daniel's interior crisis its full human weight. Claire's text message is the story's first objective evidence that something is being deliberately concealed, not a suspicious feeling, not a missing mug, but a factual discrepancy between what Vanessa told Daniel and what she told Claire. This is the moment the story's tension shifts from psychological to evidentiary. Notably, Daniel does not confront. He absorbs, processes, and continues, channeling the adrenaline of discovery into method. This is either a mark of emotional sophistication or of deep avoidance, and the story is wise enough not to immediately declare which. What is most humanly poignant in this section is the final image. Daniel sitting in the kitchen, performing domestic normality, asking the right questions, saying the right things, while the knowledge of 47 calls sits in his chest like a stone. The performance of not knowing, once begun, is extraordinarily difficult to stop. And Vanessa, laughing about a board game, has no idea the wall has already begun to crack. I spent 3 days doing nothing. This is important to understand. After what I'd found in the phone records, after the fracture in the Claire story, after the 47 calls to a number I didn't know, I spent 3 days doing nothing visible. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner, helped Lily with homework, slept beside my wife in the dark. To a casual observer, the Holt household would have appeared entirely unremarkable. Inside, I was doing the most precise and deliberate thing I'd done in years. I was building a picture. The unknown number. I'll call it the number. I ran through every public database and reverse lookup tool I could access. It was registered to a pay-as-you-go SIM, which told me something in itself. Pay-as-you-go phones are not, inherently, suspicious. Plenty of people use them for entirely legitimate reasons. But the combination of the prepaid registration, the call frequency, and the timing made a pattern that was difficult to read as coincidence. I thought about how to approach this differently. I needed context. I needed to understand the shape of what I was dealing with before I could understand the weight of it. On the third day, I called a friend. Marcus had been my closest friend for 15 years. We'd met in graduate school, lived in the same building for 3 years, been in each other's weddings. He was an architect, which meant he understood structural thinking, and he was one of those people who process information without flinching. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. I need someone to help me figure out something, I said, sitting in my car in the parking garage at work, the concrete pillars throwing long shadows in the fluorescent light. Without asking too many questions. A pause. How serious? He said. I don't know yet. That's what I'm trying to find out. Another pause, shorter. Tell me what you need. What I needed was simple in theory and uncomfortable in practice. The number had called Vanessa at 4:58 on the Saturday of the second girl's night, and the call had lasted 31 minutes. If she was in transit at that point, in her car, driving, then whoever she called was also potentially mobile or at a fixed location she was heading toward. I needed to know if Claire's party was real. It was. Claire's text had confirmed that, and a mutual friend independently mentioned it on social media that evening. But I also needed to know what Vanessa had done between 4:30 and whenever she arrived at Claire's. Claire had said she expected her late, after a work thing. There was no work event that I could verify, and I checked, obliquely, by mentioning to Vanessa the following week that a colleague was asking about some event downtown the previous Saturday, watching her face, and seeing nothing register. So there was a window, between 4:30 and approximately 7:30 or 8, when she might reasonably have arrived at Claire's. There were 3 hours unaccounted for. Marcus, who had access to the city through various professional connections I won't fully detail here, helped me establish something I couldn't have found on my own. There was a boutique hotel 3 kilometers from Claire's apartment, a small, expensive place that I'd driven past 100 times without registering, that had a ground-floor restaurant and bar that stayed open on Saturdays until midnight. He'd found it because a mutual colleague had mentioned dining there. It wasn't evidence. It was geography, but it was geography that made sense. I sat with this for 2 more days, and then I did something that felt like stepping off a ledge. On a Wednesday evening, while Vanessa was upstairs on a work call, she'd said, heading upstairs with her laptop and closing the office door, I went to the hotel. I want to be precise about what I expected to find and what I actually found, because these are not the same thing, and the difference matters. I expected to feel like a jealous husband conducting a sad surveillance operation. I expected to feel ridiculous. What I actually felt, standing in the lobby of that small hotel with its warm lighting and smell of lemon polish and wood, was a particular terrible clarity. The clarity of someone who has finally looked directly at the load-bearing wall. I sat in the bar for 40 minutes, ordering a whiskey I didn't want, looking at no one in particular. The staff was attentive and discreet in the way that expensive hotel staff always are. The room was perhaps half full. Couples, a group of business people, two women laughing loudly at the far end. I was about to leave when I saw it. Not her. Not who I expected. I saw the mug. Not literally. Not the pale blue one from my kitchen. But on the shelf behind the bar, displayed among a collection of ceramics that had been sourced from various local artisans, which the bartender would later tell me, unprompted, was a hotel initiative to support local makers. There were 6 or 7 mugs of the same distinctive pale blue, the same matte finish, the same handmade quality. This hotel was the source, which meant that someone who frequented this hotel had brought that mug into my house. I sat very still and finished my whiskey and thought about all the times I'd come home to an empty house in the past several weeks. All the times Vanessa had worked from home on days I was in the office. All the small, quiet windows of time I had not registered as significant. And then I thought about something Lily had said 3 weeks ago, which I had filed under Children Say Strange Things and never retrieved. She'd come home from school on a Tuesday and mentioned, in the offhand way that children mention things they don't know are important, that she'd seen Mom's car parked near her school when she was walking to drama rehearsal. Just the car. No Vanessa, no one inside it. Just the car, parked on a street it had no particular reason to be on, a street that was nowhere near Vanessa's office or any destination she'd mentioned. A car parked 2 blocks from a hotel. I drove home. Lily was in bed. Vanessa was in the living room, reading, physically reading, an actual book, which was unusual enough that I noticed it. She looked up when I came in and said, "There's leftover soup if you want." "Thanks," I said. "Long day." She nodded and looked back at her book. I sat in the kitchen and ate soup I didn't taste and thought about the fact that someone had been in my house, in the intimate, domestic interior of my life, with its 42 mugs and its strawberry shampoo and its model solar system on the kitchen table, and I didn't know who. I thought, before I do anything irreversible, I need to be certain. I got certain 4 days later. I had set up a small camera, a motion-activated device, the kind people use for home security, no larger than a smoke detector, in the living room. I'm not proud of this. I want to say that again. I understand the ethical weight of it, and I made the choice with my eyes open, understanding that it was the choice of a man who was trying to confirm something he already knew rather than the choice of a man seeking truth from a neutral position. The camera ran for 48 hours before it showed me anything. On the second day, I was at work. Vanessa was working from home. Lily was at school. At 11:23 in the morning, the front door opened. Vanessa appeared in the living room, and behind her, a man I'd never seen. He was tall, I'd say 6'2", 6'3", with a lean build and dark hair that was slightly long at the collar. He was perhaps 40. He was carrying what appeared to be a paper bag from a grocery or deli, and he set it down on the coffee table while Vanessa said something I couldn't fully make out. He laughed. She did too. And then she crossed the room and kissed him, and it was not the kiss of 2 people engaged in a complicated, ambiguous situation. It was the kiss of 2 people who had kissed many times before. I watched this on my phone, alone in my car in the office parking lot, and felt the structure give. This is the section in which Daniel transitions from passive suffering to active agency, a psychological shift that is both necessary and morally complex. His decision to install a camera crosses a line he acknowledges explicitly, and his self-awareness about this is crucial. He is not in denial about what he is doing or why. He frames it as verification rather than surveillance. But he is honest enough to note that the distinction is thinner than he'd like it to be. This honesty is what keeps him, and the story, from collapsing into simplistic victim and villain territory. The detail of the pale blue mugs in the hotel bar is a beautifully constructed narrative moment. What began as a domestic mystery resolves not through dramatic confrontation, but through the accumulation of sensory evidence. A mug, a hotel, A parked car. A child's offhand comment. Daniel is building a case the way he builds structures, from small precise measurements, each one load-bearing only in the context of the others. Lily's observation about the car deserves particular attention. The child has seen something she doesn't know is significant. The story uses this device. The child is unwitting witness, with appropriate restraint. She is not traumatized or weaponized. She simply reports what she noticed, the way children do, and leaves it to the adults to determine meaning. The final image, Daniel watching the footage alone in his car, seeing his wife kiss a stranger in his living room, lands with quiet devastation because the story has earned it. It has not rushed to this moment. It has made the reader understand 14 years, a daughter named Lily, a mug on a shelf, 47 phone calls. The structure giving way is not melodrama. It is the inevitable result of forces that have been building for a long time, witnessed by a man who built his professional life around understanding exactly this. I watched the footage 5 times. Not because I needed confirmation, I had that immediately, inarguably, in the first 30 seconds. But because there is something that the brain does with catastrophic information. It keeps trying to find the error, the alternative reading, the angle that changes the meaning. I watched it 5 times, and the meaning did not change. The man with the dark hair came through my door at 11:23 on a Tuesday morning. He set a paper bag on my coffee table. He kissed my wife of 14 years in the room where I sat with my daughter every evening and read about orbital mechanics and village elders. Then I put my phone in my pocket and drove back to the office and finished my day. This is the part that people find hardest to understand. I didn't go home immediately. I didn't call her. I didn't call Marcus or a lawyer or my mother. I sat at my desk and reviewed plans and answered emails and spoke in 2 meetings, and I did all of it with the kind of concentrated, precise attention that I now understand is a trauma response. The brain's emergency protocol, which is to keep the body functioning while the deeper systems process the unbearable. I needed 3 more days. Not for more evidence. I had what I needed. I needed time to understand what I was going to do with it, and to make sure that whatever I did with clarity and not with the ragged, shaking energy of someone acting in the first hours of shock. I'd seen what happened when people made structural decisions under acute stress. The buildings didn't always stay standing. During those 3 days, I did something unexpected. I called my brother. Owen and I are not close in the way that some brothers are. We're close in the way of people who grew up in the same house and experienced the same foundational things, and therefore understand each other's language without needing to explain the grammar. He lives 4 hours away. He has 2 daughters and a straightforward marriage and a very direct way of speaking that I have always appreciated and occasionally found difficult. I told him everything. This was not easy. I am, by default, a private person. I process internally. I had spent weeks carrying this alone, and now I was putting it into words for the first time. And what surprised me was how quickly it became real once spoken. How language has a way of finalizing things that remain slightly permeable as long as they exist only in your head. Owen listened without interrupting, which took some effort on his part. I could sense the contained responses, the things he was not saying. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to happen? Not what are you going to do?" Which is the question most people would have asked. What do you want to happen? It was the right question. The kind that doesn't presuppose a trajectory. I thought about it seriously. I want the truth, I said. From her. In her own words. And then I want to make decisions from there. Okay, he said. Then that's what you do. I chose a Saturday. Lily would be at her friend Maisie's house for the afternoon. Maisie's parents were picking her up at 10 a.m. and dropping her back at 5. 5 hours. I had 5 hours. I told Vanessa nothing in advance. The morning was ordinary. Lily left in a burst of noise and a forgotten jacket, and then the front door closed, and we were alone in the house in the particular quiet that follows children. Vanessa was in the kitchen making coffee. She always made the second pot on weekend mornings, the first being mine, and I came in and sat at the table and said her name. She looked up. "I need to talk to you," I said. Something crossed her face. Not guilt, or not obviously. More like the subtle recalibration of someone who has been managing multiple states simultaneously and feels one of them shift. "Okay," she said. She brought her coffee to the table and sat across from me. I had thought carefully about how to begin. I had decided, in the end, on honesty about my process, not only my conclusions. I thought she deserved to understand how I'd arrived here. even if what I'd done to arrive here was uncomfortable. I know about the man, I said. I know about the hotel. I know about the phone, the number you've called 47 times in 3 weeks. And I know he was in this house on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks ago, at 11:23 a.m. I watched her face change. It went through 3 distinct phases in perhaps 4 seconds. The first was a kind of controlled suspension, neither denial nor confession, just the face of someone buying time. The second was something that looked like calculation. And the third, the one that is most lodged in my memory now, that I return to in quiet moments, was something that looked very much like relief. Not the relief of being caught, the relief of not having to hold it anymore. How long? I asked. A pause. 7 months. The number landed like a physical thing. Who is he? His name is Elliot. He works in architectural consulting. We met at a conference. A conference. Like us. The symmetry of it was almost too much. Does Claire know? A slight hesitation. She figured it out. About 6 weeks ago. So Claire had known. Claire, who had texted me the cheerful message about the party. Who had mentioned that Vanessa would be late, not knowing she was simultaneously covering for her, or thinking she was managing me out of something she didn't want to be in the middle of. I thought about that for a moment. Claire's specific position, knowing, saying nothing, trying to stay in a neutral place that didn't exist. Did you bring him here? I asked. Into our house. She looked at the table. Yes. More than once. A longer pause. 3 times. I want to be honest about what happened inside me during this conversation, because I think the honest account is more useful than the version where I remained composed and rational throughout. I did not remain composed and rational throughout. There was a point, somewhere around the revelation about Claire, about the 3 times he had been in my house, in the rooms where my daughter watched television and did her homework and grew up, where something in me that had been held very precisely under pressure for weeks just gave. Not loudly, not dramatically. I got up from the table and walked to the sink and stood with my hands gripping the counter, breathing, looking at the window, not trusting myself to speak for perhaps 90 seconds. Vanessa said nothing during those 90 seconds. She sat at the table and waited, and I had the impression that she'd been preparing for this conversation much longer than I had, that she'd been carrying it in some form, and that the relief I'd seen on her face was real, and that it made me angrier and sadder in equal measure. When I turned back around, I said, I need to know one thing. Are you in love with him? She met my eyes, and then she said something I hadn't prepared for. I don't know, she said. 3 words, 6 syllables, and they were somehow worse than yes. The rest of the conversation lasted 2 hours. It was not a fight, not in the screaming, door-slamming sense. It was something harder than that. It was 2 people who had built 14 years together sitting at a kitchen table and trying to understand how they had arrived at a Tuesday morning in November where a stranger had stood in their living room and kissed one of them. We covered things I won't reproduce entirely here. Reasons, histories, the moment she said she'd first realized something was missing, the specific emotional erosion that she described as so gradual she hadn't seen it coming. Whether I believed all of it, which parts rang true and which felt like narrative construction after the fact. I told her about the camera. She flinched. I told her about Claire's text. She closed her eyes briefly. I told her about the mug, which had started all of this. That small pale blue thing that had found its way into our kitchen and waited patiently to be found. He left it by accident, she said. I didn't know how to get rid of it without you noticing. That was, I thought, a very accurate metaphor for the whole situation. At the end of the 2 hours, I told her I needed her to be somewhere else that night. She went to stay with a friend. Lily came home at 5 p.m., dropped by Maisie's parents, and found me in the kitchen making her favorite pasta. She'd had a wonderful afternoon. She told me about it in elaborate detail. I listened to every word. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat in the kitchen alone for a long time, in the exact spot where the morning had happened, and I let myself feel the full, unfiltered weight of it. The confrontation scene reveals something that is psychologically counterintuitive but emotionally precise: Vanessa's relief. It is one of the most honest and uncomfortable details in the entire story because it destabilizes the clean narrative of betrayed husband and guilty wife. People who carry significant secrets do not only feel guilt, they also feel the exhaustion of maintenance. Every deception requires ongoing energy, the management of timelines, the calibration of behavior, the constant split attention between two realities. Vanessa's relief upon being discovered is not the relief of someone who wanted to be caught in order to confess. It is the relief of someone whose internal system was buckling under the weight of sustained dual-life performance. Daniel's three-phase reading of her face, suspension, calculation, relief, is a clinically accurate account of what psychologists call disclosure processing, the moment a maintained secret reaches its terminus. His own response, the 90 seconds at the sink, gripping the counter, is equally important. He has been so disciplined, so structurally controlled, for so many weeks that the leak, when it comes, is not a flood but a precise, contained crack. He does not shout. He does not accuse. He breathes and waits and returns to the table. This is not emotional suppression. It is emotional regulation under extraordinary pressure. I don't know. Vanessa's answer to whether she loves Elliot is the story's most devastating line precisely because it forecloses the comfort of a clean answer. A definitive yes would allow Daniel to construct a narrative of replacement. She chose him over us. A definitive no would allow a narrative of mistake. It didn't mean what I feared. I don't know means she is genuinely uncertain, and genuine uncertainty is the hardest thing to work with because it offers no firm ground upon which to stand and make a decision. The weeks that followed were not dramatic, in the way that I think people expect aftermath to be dramatic. There was no second screaming confrontation. No lawyers in the first week. No Lily suddenly transformed into a symbol of collateral damage, which was something I was determined to protect against as fiercely as I protected anything in my life. The drama was internal. It was quiet and slow and thorough, like water working through stone. Vanessa moved into the guest room that first week, and we were very careful around each other. Careful in the way you are when you're sharing space with someone you're trying not to hurt further, while simultaneously being unable to completely protect yourself. She stopped seeing Elliot, she told me. She had ended it the night of our conversation. I didn't know whether to believe her and said so. She said she understood. We told Lily that Mom was sleeping in the guest room because Dad's snoring was out of control, which was a lie that Lily accepted with the particular skeptical but cooperative energy of a child who has decided she doesn't want to ask the next question yet. I made an appointment with a therapist. Not couples therapy. Not yet, maybe not ever, but individual therapy, because I understood that I needed somewhere to put what I was carrying that wasn't my own skull or the walls of the house. The therapist was a quiet, precise man named Dr. Ferrara who sat across from me in a warm office and listened without projecting conclusions, and within 3 sessions had helped me understand something I hadn't been able to see from inside it. I had known something was wrong for much longer than 3 weeks. This was uncomfortable to sit with. The mug had been the catalyst, yes. The girls' night and the phone records and the hotel had been the investigation. But Dr. Ferrara asked me to think about earlier, not 3 weeks earlier, not 3 months earlier. He asked me to think about a year ago, 18 months ago. And when I did, I found things I'd successfully not seen. The gradual reduction in small physical intimacies, not the dramatic ones, but the minor ones. The hand on the arm when passing, the leaning into each other on the sofa, the particular easy contact of people who are comfortable in each other's bodies. These had been withdrawing for perhaps a year. I'd attributed it to the rhythm of long marriage, the natural calming of early relationship intensity. But Dr. Ferrara pointed out that there's a difference between the settled warmth of a good long marriage and the specific withdrawal of someone who is emotionally relocating. I had noticed and filed it as benign, because the alternative was too disruptive to process. There was also something about Vanessa's restlessness in the 18 months before all this. A quality of dissatisfaction I'd observed but attributed to her work, a difficult project, the general midlife friction of being 41. She'd mentioned once, at a dinner party, that she sometimes felt like she'd made all her big decisions before she'd understood herself well enough to make them. I'd laughed along with the others and then registered a small internal discomfort that I'd immediately suppressed. She had been telling me, in the way that people tell you things they don't know how to say directly. I had been listening in the way that people listen when they're afraid of what they might hear. We tried couples counseling for 6 weeks. I want to be honest about this. I went because I felt I owed it to 14 years and a daughter who smells like strawberry shampoo, not because I was certain I wanted to stay. Vanessa went with what appeared to be genuine effort and genuine sorrow. She did not minimize what she'd done or attempt to reframe it as my failure. She took responsibility with a consistency that I found, depending on the day, either meaningful or insufficient. The couples counselor told us something in the third session that I've thought about many times since, that betrayal rarely happens in a healthy relationship, but also rarely happens to someone who has no awareness of unhappiness. Both things can be true simultaneously. The injury is real and the context exists. Neither cancels the other. At the end of 6 weeks, I told Vanessa, in a session with the counselor present, because I understood this required a witness, that I didn't think we were going to be able to rebuild what we'd had into something I could live in. Not because I didn't love her. I did, in some form, probably still do, in the complicated way that 14 years creates a kind of love that doesn't simply switch off. But because I had sat with the footage of a man in my living room for weeks, and I had sat with I don't know for weeks, and I had sat with the image of that mug on the shelf in a hotel bar for weeks, and I had realized that trust, for me, is not something that can be partially restored. It either holds the weight or it doesn't. And I didn't believe this one would hold. She cried. I held her hand across the table, which is one of the stranger things I've done, and also, I think, one of the more honest. We told Lily on a Sunday afternoon in December, sitting together on the sofa, both of us, which had been important to me, that she had both of us in the room and heard it from both of us at the same time. We told her that we were going to live in different houses, and that this was a decision we'd made together, and that it had nothing to do with her and everything to do with complicated adult situations that she would understand better when she was older, and that we both loved her with an intensity that was not subject to renegotiation. Lily listened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Is it because of the guest room thing?" "Yes," I said. She nodded, slowly. "Okay." Another pause. "Will you both still come to the play?" "Yes," we both said, simultaneously. She exhaled. "Okay," she said again. And then she leaned into me and put her head on my shoulder, and Vanessa put her hand on Lily's knee, and the three of us sat like that for a long moment. A family in the form we'd been, briefly, for the last time. The divorce was finalized in the following spring. It was not acrimonious, which I think surprised people who expected it to be. We have a daughter who needs two parents who can be in the same room, which provides a reliable incentive for decency that I think underrated in these situations. We worked out custody with a mediator rather than attorneys facing off across a conference table. Vanessa found an apartment close enough that Lily could walk between houses. On the first day Lily stayed at the new apartment, she called me at 9 p.m. to tell me she'd made up a name for the guest bedroom. She'd decided it was the moon room because the light through the curtains looked like moonlight, and I laughed and said I thought that was an excellent name. There were hard days, many of them. Days when I drove home to a house that was exactly as I remembered it, and also entirely different, and sat in the kitchen where the confrontation had happened and felt the absence of everything that used to fill the rooms. Days when I ran through every version of a different choice, a different outcome, a different earlier moment when I might have seen more clearly, or she might have turned toward me instead of away. Days when I was angry and days when I was sad and days when I was something I didn't have a name for yet, something that lived in the specific register between grief and acceptance. But also other days. Days when I came home to the particular quiet of the house and felt, for the first time in years, like I was standing in a space that was genuinely mine. Days when I picked Lily up from school and felt the uncomplicated pleasure of her company without the background noise of managed unease. Days when I sat in Dr. Ferrara's office and said something I'd never said aloud and felt the specific relief of language that finally fits. Marcus took me out for a drink 3 months after the divorce was final. We sat at the bar in a neighborhood place, not the hotel. I didn't go to the hotel. And he said, "I keep thinking about the mug." "So do I said. "It's such a small thing," he said, "to start from." "That's usually how it works," I said. "The small things are holding the weight. You don't know until one of them shifts." He nodded. We sat with that for a moment. "Are you okay?" he said. I thought about it. Really thought. The way Dr. Ferrara had taught me to think, which is not toward a conclusion, but toward the honest current state of things. "I'm getting there," I said. "Some days I'm there. Other days I'm still getting." "That's probably honest," he said. "That's the idea," I said. Lily is 12 now. She has decided to be an actress, marine biologist, judge in no particular order. And she approaches this ambition with the organizational rigor of someone who has simply not yet encountered the concept of limitations. She comes to me on weekends, and we cook together, and she is in charge of seasoning, and I have learned to trust her judgment on this. She visits Vanessa in the moon room on weekdays, and from what Lily tells me, that apartment has become a real home. Plants in the windows, a new cat named Ptolemy, a kitchen that she says smells like coffee and good bread in the mornings. Vanessa and I speak on the phone twice a week about Lily, about logistics, about the ordinary cooperative business of shared parenting. The conversations are not warm, exactly, but they're not cold either. They're the conversations of two people who have landed on the other side of something very hard and are doing the work of staying there. I still think about the mug sometimes. The pale blue one with the chipped handle that found its way into my kitchen and waited there among the 42 others for me to finally count carefully enough to notice it wasn't supposed to be there. I don't know what happened to it. It was gone by the time I looked for it after the confrontation, taken or discarded by Vanessa in the final weeks. Part of me wishes I'd kept it, as a reminder. Part of me is glad it's gone. What I carry instead is something harder to describe. A knowledge about myself that I didn't have before, that I am capable of more than I thought I was. That the capacity to survive the breaking of something foundational and still construct something new from the material, that's not a minor thing. It's actually the main thing. For the first time in years, the house is mine. The evenings are mine. The quiet is mine. And it's not the humming, pressured silence of something held beneath water. It's just quiet. The ordinary, bearable quiet of a life that belongs to you. That's enough. That, I've learned, is actually quite a lot. The resolution of Daniel's story illuminates what might be the most psychologically sophisticated truth about betrayal. That surviving it well is not about the magnitude of the response, but about the quality of the reconstruction. Daniel's arc is, at its core, a story about a man who spent years using his professional precision as a substitute for emotional precision, noticing everything except the things that mattered most, filing discomfort into benign categories, building a domestic life with the same structural confidence he brought to his engineering work, without applying the same diagnostic rigor to the silent stresses accumulating within it. His final insight, that he had known something was wrong longer than 3 weeks, longer than he could comfortably admit, is the story's deepest emotional truth. Betrayal rarely arrives without antecedents. It is almost never the beginning of the problem. It is usually the moment the problem becomes undeniable. What is genuinely moving about Daniel's resolution is the specificity of his grief. He does not dissolve into bitterness. He does not reconstruct himself as a victim. He sits with the complexity. He loved Vanessa, and she betrayed him, and she was also unhappy in ways she failed to communicate, and he was also less present to those signals than he might have been. He holds all of this simultaneously, which is not a moral failure, but a moral achievement. The image of the three of them, Daniel, Vanessa, Lily, on the sofa in December, together for the last time, is the story's emotional apex. It is not triumphant and not tragic. It is human. 3 people who made and unmade a family, trying to do the remaining work with as much care as they can. And in the end, Daniel alone in his house, his quiet, his life, is not a picture of loss. It is a picture of someone who walked through the collapse of something foundational and found that he was still standing. The pale blue mug, absent now, did its strange work. It was the 43rd thing in a world of 42, the deviation that forced a reckoning, the small, unaccountable detail that a structural engineer finally had to account for. What it ultimately measured was not the dimensions of a betrayal, but the load-bearing capacity of a man, which turned out to be considerable.